Welcome to the TraxionGG YouTube channel, and I'm not John or Rich, but ROBO46. Slowing down on the MotoGP 22 game can be tricky, especially to newcomers, but fret not. I'm here to guide you through the best braking practices on two wheels. Going fast isn't just a case of cracking open the throttle as soon as possible. Slowing down properly is also key to a rapid lap time, as weird as that sounds. Braking in the MotoGP 22 video game feels very different compared to previous games. People had troubles with MotoGP 21's braking to the extent where I wrote a whole article about it on the TraxionGG website, and now I'm back to give tips on braking for the latest iteration. I've already had plenty of comments on my videos and messages asking how to brake on the new game, so sit back, slow down and hit those apexes. So there has been a few changes this year. As previously mentioned, the braking on MotoGP 22 feels different to the last two official Motorcycle Grand Prix games. It will take practice to get the knack, so please bear that in mind. Of course, if you're starting off as a newcomer to the series, I would highly suggest tackling the tutorials first. Auto brake is available, but unfortunately it isn't great, as it slows you down too early and you will struggle to overtake the AI when you've got it switched on. Assisted front brake and brake input modulation helps by adjusting your brake pressure so you're not too aggressive going into a corner, and it will also help reduce stoppies, so it is worth a test. Unfortunately, joint brakes have been removed from MotoGP 22 for some unknown reason. Previously, you could simply mash the left trigger and both front and rear brakes would be applied, but sadly, that is no more. If you're used to using them, you're going to have to adapt to applying the front and rear brake independently. On a PlayStation controller, the front brake is with L2 and the rear brake with cross, and on Xbox it is left trigger and A. Just as a side note, this guide is for PC, PlayStation and Xbox riders and not the digital Nintendo Switch inputs. After taking on the tutorial, the next thing to do is to learn your braking markers. These are visual indicators around each track that you can use as a reference for when you should start braking. Most of the tracks have braking markers represented as white horizontal lines alongside the curbs, but in some corners you will find that they are lacking. In this scenario, you must use other visual reference points. Take the new Mandalika circuit for example, where turn 10 is a tight right-hander, which requires heavy braking from high speed, but there unfortunately are no braking markers. There are however lampposts on the left-hand side of the track, so I'd suggest using these as your braking marker. Moto 3, Moto 2 and MotoGP all feel different compared to previous years, especially with the braking, which is why I'm going to cover all three categories. We'll start off with Moto 3. The Moto 3 bikes are almost as difficult to stop as the MotoGP bikes in MotoGP 22, not because of how fast you're going, but because of how far you have to push to get a good lap time out of them. Keeping your corner speed high is key, and so is late braking. You will find it in hard braking zones, the rear wheel will come up in the air, and this is also known as a stoppie. This wasn't an issue for the Moto 3 bikes in MotoGP 21, but be wary, it can happen in the current title. The rear brake is also pretty powerful for the Moto 3 bikes, meaning if you're not careful, the rear will lock and it will come round on you, causing you to crash, which can be very awkward. Also bear in mind that using a significant amount of engine braking can cause you to lose control under braking, so I would suggest setting the engine braking to 3 or less via the on-screen options using the D-pad, or you can also change them in the garage. The best way of getting one of these motorcycles stopped is to be as smooth as you can with the front brake, as going straight to full front brake pressure will cause a stoppie and then you can't turn into the corner. You won't need full brake pressure for every corner of course, but for a hairpin for example, you want to get to full brake pressure quickly without just slamming it on straight away. It's also a good idea to pull back on the left analog stick to move your rider's body weight backwards, helping to keep the rear of the bike on the ground. If you're using manual gears, you want to start shifting down while braking, but again, don't do this too quickly as the rear will lose traction and come round on you. Once you're in the right gear and you've slowed down sufficiently, it's time to ease off the brake pressure and start tipping into the corner. At this point, if you have full brake pressure applied, you won't be able to tip in very easily, and this will cause you to run wide and miss the apex. You can of course trail brake into corners, providing you're not using too much front brake. If you find yourself going into a corner a bit too hot, you can use the rear brake to help slow you down, but just by tapping the appropriate button instead of holding it down. Otherwise, the rear will lose traction and you'll likely crash again. Put all these methods together and you'll be tackling the corners with ease. Now onto Moto 2. Strangely, I find the braking for Moto 2 easier than the other two classes. Everything just feels smoother. The rear brake is much more useful and you can get away with being a bit more aggressive. For the engine braking setting, you can go up to 4 without too many issues. The braking techniques from Moto 3 still apply here, however, only this time you will need to adjust the braking markers by braking earlier than you would with a 250cc machine. For the harder braking areas, you should still pull back on the left analog stick to minimize stoppies, but you can shift down the gears quicker than you could with the Moto 3 motorbike without worrying too much about the rear coming around on you. So apply the front brake, pull back on the left analog stick, apply the rear brake if needs be, shift down the gears to your required cog, ease off the front brake and release the rear brake, and then it's time to tip into the corner. Simple, right? Again, trying to tip into the corner with full brake pressure will cause you issues. Use the rear brake to close the line if you're a bit wide. Over to the big boys, the MotoGP category. This is the class a lot of people are having trouble with under braking. The MotoGP bikes are much more powerful than the Moto 3 and Moto 2 machines, and this means they are harder to stop. Again, adjustments to your braking markers will be required as you'll be slowing down earlier than both Moto 2 and Moto 3 due to the extra speed, but bear in mind that they do have more powerful carbon ceramic brakes. Speaking of brakes, you will also have to select the correct brake disc for each track pre-event. Using the incorrect brake disc will mean they will either overheat or they will be too cold. Both will result in you struggling to stop the bike for corners. If you're unsure of which brake disc to use, look out for the white light bulb icon in the brake selection screen, as this will suggest the optimal setup. Stoppies are still possible when you're pushing, but they aren't as exaggerated or as frequent as they were in the MotoGP 21 game, thankfully. If you do find yourself in a stoppie, the best way to lower the rear of the bike is by releasing the front brake pressure by about half. You will of course still run wide, and depending on how quickly you get the rear back on the track, you may even run off track altogether. But the key is not to panic when you're in a stoppie. If you hurriedly overcorrect, you'll more than likely go all the way over the handlebars, which obviously you don't want to be doing. It's worth remembering that when you are mid-stoppie, you won't be able to turn the bike into the corner, so just concentrate on getting the rear wheel back on the ground first. A new braking problem you may find in MotoGP 22 is a tank slapper. This can occur if you're too aggressive turning into the corner and applying too much front brake. The front will momentarily lock and you will end up in a violent wobble. This caught me out a couple of times when the game first came out, but don't worry, you can recover from it. Just like in a stoppie, you can exit a tank slapper by releasing the front brake as much as you can. Also, you'll need to try to keep as upright as possible by counter steering, moving the left analog stick in the opposite direction to the tank slapper. Eventually, the bike will calm down and you can continue. Using the techniques you've learnt from Moto 3 and Moto 2 will help in the MotoGP category. Being smooth is key. Under heavy braking, try to keep the bike as upright as possible, as this will help slow you down and maintain control. Apply the front brake swiftly but smoothly. Add a bit of rear brake if you wish. Shift the rider's weight back with the left analog stick and shift down the gears until you reach the required one. You can shift down the gears quickly in MotoGP without consequence thanks to the seamless gearbox. When you're in the right gear and you slow down sufficiently, start to release the brake so that you can tip into the corner, trail brake in until you hit the apex, and then release the brake completely. As obvious as it sounds, practicing really does help a lot. The more laps you do, the better understanding you'll have of how and when to brake, and then it will become second nature. I'm always asked how I know where to brake on all the tracks, and it all comes down to the amount of practice I've done over the years. The in-game MotoGP Academy will help you increase your pace too, so don't discard this mode. Your controller is providing feedback, so if it's vibrating when you're trail braking in, it's telling you you're close to crashing. Don't ignore this either. Just remember, we've all got to start somewhere, and some people will pick it up quicker than others. But don't be disheartened. Keep it up and you'll be nailing those apexes in no time. That's about it for our MotoGP 22 braking guide, but if you have any more tips, feel free to put them down in the comments below. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the TraxionGG YouTube channel for more, and you can also check out my two-wheel content over on my personal YouTube channel, ROBO46. But in the meantime, keep it pinned, unless you're braking, and then de-pin it. Bye!